Hi, I'm Steve Moriarty from Moriarty's Gem Art. You'll find our retail store on the square in Crown Point, or you can find us online at MoreGems.com. Today I'm going to try and help you with how to buy colored gems. And colored gems are much like diamond in their grading, that is. We grade them by the 4 C's, which is color, cut, clarity, and carat weight. To get involved with grading color, this is a most difficult task, and I find it difficult, and I'm sure you'll find it very difficult too, because we're dealing with many stones, different colors, different secondary colors, and these all create difficulties in determining what the best colored gem is. We have no grading systems for colored gems, unlike diamonds, which Diamond GIA has set up a grading system that they use. They use samples that they can put a grade on every stone, but colored stones, we're not so lucky to have this. So it creates a lot of difficulty in you buying it. Other things that make this difficult is our perception of color. Like the person that's colorblind, he only sees part of the colors that are available in colored stones. And I think this is true of everybody. We all perceive color a little differently. So when we look at a colored gem, we may not see it exactly the same as another does. Over the years, I've seen this with ruby, the most dramatic color that people perceive differently. I look at a stone that I think's red, and somebody will say it's violet red, or another will say it's pinkish red, and to me it just looks red. So this and many other stones, I'm sure this is true of. In general, when looking at a colored stone, darker is better. So the deeper the tone of the stone, the better it is. Generally, the greater saturation of the color, the better it is. And the more pure the hue. Hue is what we perceive a color is. If you're asked what color is it and you say it's red, this is the hue of the stone. So deeper tone, more vivid saturation, and would be the stones that are generally the better colored stones. But this is only goes so far, because you take a stone like an amethyst, which in this case, the deeper the tone, the better the stone, but you can also go too far in tone. They can be overly dark, which is true of many stones, including garnet, sapphire. And overly dark is less desirable, because the problem with an overly dark stone is that when you go to a low lighting situation, it's going to appear as black, and you're going to see no hue to it. It'll only appear black. So the darker is better. It goes only so far, because there are many stones that in lighter tones, if you cut them correctly, just like a diamond, no color, but cut correctly, it's a beautiful gem. So there's many gems that never reach those deep saturated colors. You take aquamarine, and the best you're going to get is a medium tone in color, and so they're highly desirable at medium tones. You can take other stones like Malaya garnet. This is a fairly light color in garnet, but cut correctly, it is a beautiful gem. It looks like a diamond in brilliance, and a diamond this color would be very expensive. So the full color range, tonal range, can be beautiful. Other stones, yes, emerald, more desirable in darker tones. Rarely does it come over dark. Same with ruby, rarely over dark, mostly medium tones, and so this is where their color is the most desirable. So most colored gems do not occur in a pure hue. Usually there's secondary tones, secondary pleochroic colors that are involved, and we have to determine which of those we desire, and sometimes it's a personal thing which tone you desire. But some things you take, like peridot, and more desirable is less yellow, possibly more blue to the green. Again, you never get a pure green color. The other consideration is what lighting you're looking at. When you look at a colored gem, you need to go to multiple lighting sources. You look at it in incandescent, which is normal home lighting. You would like to see it in daylight or fluorescent lighting, or LED lighting, which is the future. Because the issue is, like the color change garnets, it can be red in incandescent light, and it can be blue to blue-green in daylight. So you have to look at all these colored gems in different lighting to see just what you're going to see as you go from one lighting source to another. Tourmalines in daylight can be a beautiful pink color, and when you bring them inside to incandescent lights, there'll be some brown tone often added to particularly the pink tourmalines. So it's really important that you move around to different lighting and don't make your determination on whether you like the stone or not just with one light source. Color zoning is another characteristic that you might want to consider when looking at colored gems, particularly when you're looking at sapphires, amethyst, of course, bicolor stones. You know, in the case of sapphires, I've seen stones that only had color in the culet of the stone. The rest of the stone, when you looked at the side of the stone, was completely colorless. But that color in the culet spread through the whole stone because of its location and made it a beautiful looking sapphire. But the problem with color zoning, sometimes you turn a stone just slightly when looking face up at it, and you'll see the zoning in the stone. So the more the zoning is obvious and detracts from the color, the less expensive or the less desirable the stone is. In the case of bicolors, that how the color is placed, like an ametrine. If you can place the color that is split 50-50 down the middle, this is the most desirable. But whether it be 50-50 or 30-70, there can all be beautiful stones, and you just have to consider the overall look and how zoning affects these stones. Another thing that's considered rightfully or not about color is the source of the gem. We often say that Burmese ruby is the finest ruby, and maybe it is, but you'll also find fine rubies currently from Mozambique, but in general Burma produced greater rubies. Many stones like tanzanite, we want to say it came from block D, but many fine stones came from block C, block B, block D, block A. So you can't pinpoint a particular source and say it's going to produce the best color. Pakistan has definitely produced the finest peridots, I will say that, but Burma also produces some very fine peridots. Other stones, you know, we used to say that Uruguay was the finest amethyst, but now I've changed my mind. Rwanda is the finest amethyst. So you can't necessarily say that a particular source is the best or the finest because it changes over time and different sources replace others. Ones run out of material and you can't buy it from there anymore. And so another source may produce as fine of material. When choosing color, it's important to choose what pleases you. Let your eye be the judge. We all choose colors differently, just like our clothes. We don't pick the same colors in clothes that our friends pick. We all have personal colors we like best. So if you look at colored stones, pick what you like. You may find that you find a bargain because what you like may not have been what I liked, and I put a higher price on what I like. If you're choosing for investment, maybe it's a different story. Maybe you want to pick what I like because I've learned over the years that what a higher percentage of the people pick as a finer gem is what I price higher. So this works for investment, but not for personal choice. You know, let your eye be the judge and you'll make a wise choice. So the next factor we want to consider is clarity. And the clarity system we use is the one used by the GIA. It's the most commonly used in the business. And GIA uses their system for grading diamonds, but they give it a handicap meaning that they split it into 3 different grades, 1, 2, and 3. And 1 would include the stones that are commonly seen flawless. 2 would include stones that are seen flawless but more commonly have inclusions. And 3 are the stones that are rarely flawless. 3 would include emeralds, pink and red tourmalines. 2 would be the garnets and spinels. I say they're occasionally flawless, but often will have small things in them. And the morganite and tanzanite would be in class 1, which are often flawless. So how do we identify inclusions? So the tools I use, the most common tool, and if you're without tools, you can often use just a regular table lamp. And using a table lamp, you use the edge of the lamp, and you'll place it about here and move the stone in different directions, and you'll be able to see much of what's in the stone. The other tool would be a flashlight, and you do the same thing. You shine the light perpendicular to the table of the stone, or where you're looking at the stone, and you'll be able to see the inclusions that are inside. Or in the case of this citrine, the inclusions that aren't there, because this is totally clean. And then you have gems like garnet, which have what's called SYLK in it. Generally, they're eye clean until you put a light to it and you can see kind of a haze, almost looks like a fog. You know, there are SYLK that forms in garnets, and it's an identifiable characteristic. They form much like this, and they're very fine needles. We want to try to avoid them. Most of the garnets have them in it, but the more you get, the more it affects the brilliance of the stone. So this is an effective tool. So the other thing you might want to use in combination with these, or on their own, would be, of course, the microscope, which is a highly effective tool for identifying inclusions. This particular scope you can buy for under $300 and does a great job. This is by Gemoro. One of the easiest tools to use is the visor. This is a 2.5 magnification. And you get magnification and you have your hands free, so you can use the flashlight and you can easily see what's inside the stone. These are about $40 for a visor, and you can also use the handheld loop to do the same thing. You really need 3 hands to do this, but so those are the tools that we use to identify the inclusions that are in stones. So the types of inclusions affect how things are priced. Like the SYLK, you can have eye visible inclusions, but they affect brilliance significantly, because even though you can't see them, they do stop the passage of light. Or you can have veils, and depending on where the veil's at, can affect the price less. A veil out towards the edge is less effective on the price than it is if you place an inclusion in the center that's easily eye visible. There are risky inclusions, like an emerald. You specifically want to look, like if you're looking at an emerald cut emerald, for the veils that go completely across the corner of a stone. That's a stone that most likely when it's set, it's going to be broken. You also see that in princess cut diamonds. It's just a real common inclusion that you try to avoid, because it has a definite effect on the durability of the gem. So these inclusions, they affect the price of a stone. In type 1 and 2 gems, the ones that are more commonly seen, eye clean. And eye clean is really what we should be looking for. We don't really want to look for flawless gems, because in the rarer gems it just cuts out so many of the stones that you could possibly buy if you were looking for a flawless gem. So most of us in the business are looking for eye clean. The cleaner, the better, of course. But if you rule out all the stones that are eye clean but are not flawless, you're going to end up with a very small selection of stones. And there are other factors that we are talking about that have to be combined in the overall value of this gem. So the inclusions in type 1 and 2, once the inclusions are eye visible, the price can be affected by as little as 20% to as much as 80% of the value. So the more visible the inclusion is, the greater the reduction in the value of that gem. So that's pretty much our discussion of clarity, and next we'll move on to what I consider most important as a cutter, and that's cutting. So the next factor we want to discuss is cutting, and cutting is very important to me as I am a cutter. Over the years, cutting has been not as important as color, and when cutters overseas look at a piece of rough, they think, how much weight can I get out of that stone, rather than how brilliant can I make it. For me, it's all about how brilliant can I make it. Unfortunately, colored stones are generally sold per carat, and the emphasis has not been on cutting, so they have taken advantage of this factor of producing a stone that has greater weight by cutting it really improperly and not producing brilliance. If you look at a lot of rough gemstones, they're very flat. This is an example. This is a pink sapphire from Madagascar, and it traditionally is really flat. So the stone may be 10 millimeters wide, but it's only 4 millimeters deep. And so to maximize weight out of this stone, you cut the culet very shallow. Now the culet is the bottom point of the stone, and to maximize weight, if you think about this crystal, if we're cutting it and we want to get maximum size out of it, if we change the culet angle to lower, it goes out further on the crystal. You know, ideally this may be the angle that I would cut that stone at, but the overseas cutter is going to get a much bigger stone by cutting this shallower. But unfortunately, there's what we call critical angle. Critical angle for sapphire is 35 degrees. So anytime you cut close to that or below 35 degrees, as in the case of what they do overseas, in the center you will lose all brilliance, and it's what is called windowing. A window is something like looking through a window, you see right through, you can read a book through it. You know, if you take a low a stone and place it over the written page, if you can read the letters through it, it's cut too shallow. So when you cut, ideally, all light will be reflected in the stone and reflected back to your eye. There will be no window. Windowed stones will typically have a window in the center. Then out further in the cut, they'll change the angle and it will start reflecting. So you get brilliance around the outer edge of the stone, but no brilliance in the center. When I cut a stone, I never cut windows. You know, I always maintain above critical angle, and preferably 3, 4, 5 degrees above critical angle will produce a greater brilliance in a stone. It does affect the weight of the stone. You know, you may lose an extra 20% to cut it correctly, but you get the brilliance that makes such a satisfactory gem. So the top half of the gem, known as the crown, also affects how brilliant a stone is. You would like a little extra height to a crown. Again, these flat pieces of rough only allow for a very flat crown. So again, using my hands, I mean, a flat crown is like this, where the proper crown will have more crown percentage. There'll be a higher volume in the crown, and it'll produce a greater brilliance. The angle that you cut the crown at has less of an effect than on the pavilion side of the stone, but it still has an effect on the gem. The other thing that affects how brilliant the stone is the quality of the polish. I make every attempt to get a perfect polish on gems. Sometimes it's difficult, certain gems impossible, but you try and produce the flattest surface you can. The flatter the surface is, the less scratches on it, the more brilliance you're going to get. And what you'll see in a lot of stones that are cut overseas, either they just didn't polish far enough, they didn't take the extra time to polish out what are called little pits. If you look under magnification, again using your loupe, you'll see little pits in the stone, and those pits could have been polished out. The pits are from the coarse grinding wheels that we use, and it just pulls out material out of the surface. And if you spend a little extra time and polish a little further, you'll get rid of those. The other issues you'll see in cutting from overseas, the polish will have lines in it, or it'll be wavy. These are due to a couple of factors. One is improper polishing equipment. The laps that they use to polish, which is a flat rotating plate, actually has lines and irregularities in it, and this will be reflected in the surface of the gem that they cut. Other times they just look at it and say, that's good enough. I couldn't get all the scratches out, but it's good enough. They won't see it. But under magnification, you can see it. And if you can see it under magnification, it will have some effect on the brilliance of the gem. So polish is what I try to excel at. I find it more important to get a great polish than to get perfect meets. Some people, particularly when they do combination or competition, the quality of the meets, which are where every facet comes together. This facet meets this one next to it, and they want those meets to be perfect. But to get great brilliance, perfect meets are not necessary. I mean, it's great when they do all line up, but getting perfect polish is really the key to brilliance. Then one other factor that has an effect is what style we cut. The type of cut that you do can affect the brilliance of a stone dramatically. And in general, stones that are cut 1-to-1 proportions, like squares, rounds, trillion cuts, will be the most brilliant. It's not always the case, but they have the potential for the greatest brilliance. Whereas marquise with one long direction, pear shapes, will tend to have less brilliance, particularly in the tips of the gems, which in dark gems can have no brilliance at all. So the cut that we choose does have some effect on the brilliance and the ultimate overall look of the gem. Deep cuts are another thing to consider. I find no issue with deep cuts. Matter of fact, our best-selling cut, which is the Portuguese round, which is citrine, is a Portuguese round gem. Its depth is probably 85% of its width. So it's 85% depth, meaning if it were 10 millimeters wide, it would be 8.5 millimeters deep. This is one of our most popular cuts because it's one of the most brilliant cuts that we do. It's a little more of an issue with setting, so setters have a little more problem with it. Standard heads are probably not as deep enough to carry the extra depth needed. But the brilliance is extraordinary, and I've always go back to when I was traveling to Bangkok and looking at parcels of sapphires, and there may be 500 stones in a parcel, and you're looking at them and one just looks at you and just goes bam, it's just amazingly brilliant. And then you take it out of the paper and it looks like a snow cone. It is 150% depth. Extremely deep, impossible to set, so you can't buy it. But extra depth does not affect brilliance. It often improves brilliance. But the issues of setting and the issues of you're paying for weight, and there's a lot of weight in the belly, so you get a stone that looks like a 5 carat, and it really weighs 7 or 8 carats and you're paying per carat. So those are a couple of the issues, but brilliance is definitely not the issue of an overly deep stone. So another benefit of deep cutting is how it affects color. You know, the deeper you cut a stone, the darker the stone will be. It's just like looking through water. If you look, the deeper you look into water, the bluer it becomes. So this is one more benefit of a deep cut. Finally, in cut, you want to look at the symmetry of the stone. Just how symmetrical it is when you look from the crown. And probably the more common issue is how symmetrical it is when you look at the pavilion of the gem. Because often you'll look at gems and they look symmetrical when you look down on it. But if you look from the back, the culet of the stone, the bottom point, very often is off center. And that's going to produce a much less brilliant stone. It's going to produce something that looks distorted when you look at it from the surface. So look closely at how symmetrical it is from all directions. When I cut a stone, I use a machine that doesn't allow me to cut out of symmetry. I mean, I could force it, but you really want a highly symmetrical stone. The facets should be facing across from each other, and when you use a high quality machine, that's exactly what you get. This facet reflects to this facet. If this facet's turned somewhat, it will not reflect correctly. So symmetry is also very important in the cut of the gem. Okay, our fourth C is carat weight. Named after the carob seed, it was used in ancient times because the carob seed had pretty much the same weight. You could pick any carob seed and it would be a similar weight. So it was used in weighing items, including gems in the past. Carat is 1/5 of a gram. And carat has a pretty dramatic effect on how gems are priced. You know, if we took a 5-carat ruby, it could be $40,000 a carat, whereas an emerald, which we consider to be as valuable as ruby, is only $9,000 a carat in the same size. And this is based on the rarity by size. Tsavorite garnet compared to rhodolite garnet. The tsavorite is $8,000 a carat, and the rhodolite garnet is only $200 a carat. Tanzanite, little different situation. Tanzanite prices aren't so dramatically different by weight. If you take a 2-carat tanzanite at say $500 a carat, you can also buy a 10-carat, much bigger stone for only $700 a carat. So just a slight difference. As compared to sapphire, where a 2-carat can be $1,500 a carat, and the 10-carat can be $5,000 per carat. So the weight of a particular gem or the difference between different species of gems can be pretty dramatic with differences in weights. The apparent sizes of gems based on their weight can be affected by cut. We talked about the Portuguese round gem, this citrine that weighs 29 carats. If you cut it to a standard round, it only weighed 22 carats. They would both sell for the same price per carat. So the apparent size you get from a standard round compared to this Portuguese cut is going to be much bigger for a much less price. The other factor that is involved is specific gravity. Specific gravity is the density of the gem, like the difference between lead and glass or whatever. Much difference in specific gravity. So that affects the apparent size of a gem. So the difference between sapphire and emerald is fairly significant. If you put a 1-carat sapphire next to a 1-carat emerald, the emerald will look much larger, even though it weighs the same. Another thing that affects the price of gems and the price by carat size is their availability. Often we'll run into times where they find a pocket of gems and all of a sudden there's a lot of gems available. You know, this has happened recently, Rwanda amethyst, many of the garnets, the Malaya garnet I showed you earlier, because it was available at the time. You could buy a larger gem much cheaper than you normally could buy it. So the availability on the market and the demand in the market can affect how gems are priced per carat. Hopefully this will help you in the process of buying colored gemstones and ultimately lead you to one of our websites where we sell colored gems, including MoreGems.com, TanzaniteJewelryDesigns.com, and OpalLust.com. And I'm Steve Moriarty from Moriarty's Gem Art.